All right, let me start sharing my screen. Can I run to my screen?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
See your screen.
All right, wonderful. So we're just going to today we'll be starting React. If I heard last week y'all went over control flow, so I'm just gonna briefly go over functions and then briefly write a program to use a couple functions. So I'll just in here write a script. So basically, a function in JavaScript is a way for you to combine frequently used behavior, basically behavior. And so basically how function is it's the word function and then the open and close parentheses. And here you can put different parameters if you want. And then there'll be the function name, sorry. So let's just say the function name is display, right? And so here is a parameter, something I want to display. So maybe if I want, and you name it. So let's say I want to display, let's just say text to display. And then here inside the curly brackets, that's where you put the statement. So here I'll just do alert text to display. And I'll run that. Oh yeah, functions need to be called. So if I want to call it, I'll just say display like this. And you see here, I didn't put the text to display, so that's why it said undefined. So if I actually put what I want to alert, so hello class, and I refresh the page, you see how hello class gets displayed like this. There's another way to write a function. This is a function that has a name. There's another type of function called anonymous function, or arrow function.
Mr. David,
Oh yeah.
your screen is, the font size is very small. I have to zoom in before I see. So can you
Gotcha.
just increase the font a bit? Thank you.
How is it now? We're talking about which one? The one in here.
No, the code, your code.
The code. Gotcha. How's it now?
Yeah, it's a lot better. But you can just increase it a little bit.
A little bit more.
Thank you. Better now.
All right. All right, there you go. And so on top of anonymous function it's anonymous function because it can be put without a name. So if you want an anonymous function, I'll just say let's see const anonymous function, and it's equal to, and this is the syntax of putting an actual anonymous arrow function. So I can do the same thing, text to display. And so you can just do alerts text to display. And so here, instead of doing display hello class, we can just do anonymous function hello class. Yeah. And reload it like that. Does that make sense? Anyone? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
All right, cool. So now I'm just going to write a program that uses the anonymous function. So just a quick program. So it will just be a program that will take in two strings and see if they're equal. For example, we know class and class, right? Those are equal. We know that, but we know class and David, those things aren't equal, right? So I'm just gonna quickly make a function for that. So I'm just going to do const r strings equal is equal to, and you'll take these two strings, so just name them str1 and str2. And so we know if the sizes of the two strings are not the same. For example, if you have class and you have class, right? This has 5 letters in it, and this has 6. So I know they can't be the same. So I'll just do in this statement. And the way to get the how many characters are in a string is the dot length. So str1 dot length is not equal to str2 dot length, right? If that's not the case, we're simply going to alert not equal, right? And so now we can loop, now know they're equal, we can loop through it. So I'm just going to do a for loop. So it will be for let I equals 0, I is less than str1 dot length, and then I plus plus. And then in it, we can check character by character. And how you check character by character is basically if you have str1, you want to find the first item, it will be str1 0. That'll be the first item, because the indices they start from 0. So the zeros so index 0 is the first item, index 1 is the second item, and so and so. So we can do if str1 I, if that is not equal to str2 at index I, and if that's not, if that's not, we can just do alert not equal, and then I'm gonna do something called return. What return does is it will break out of the function entirely, right? And so if we've gotten past here, we can assume that they're equal. So we can just do alerts equal. And so if we run it, but before we run it, we can just prompt them. So we can do str1 is equal to prompt, enter the first string, and then str2 is equal to prompt, enter the second string, and then here we can do r strings equal str1 and then str2. And you see here we have a function here. Imagine all this functionality. Imagine if every time we wanted to ask if 2 strings are equal, if you just had to copy and paste this over and over and over, it would be a lot of repeated code. Am I right? It'll be a lot of repeated code. So one thing function does is it helps simplify it, but you only need to write the code once. And so every time you want to call it, you just call it like this. And by calling it like this, it will run all this code here. So if I save this, see, you enter the first string, I will say car, the second string car, and you see they're equal, right? And then if you try again, first string car, second string person, we see they're not equal. Does this make sense? Does that make sense? Anyone, did what I just say make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Makes sense. All right, wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so now we've talked about functions. We've talked about running a program. So the next thing we're going to talk about is React. So what is React? So for that, I'm going to play this quick 2-minute video, and it'll clarify a lot of things about React.
React, a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, developed at Facebook and released in 20. React, a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, developed at Facebook and released in 2013. It's safe to say React has been the most influential UI library of recent memory. We use it to build components that represent logical, reusable parts of the UI. The beauty of React is that the simplicity of building a component has been brought down to its theoretical minimum. It's just a JavaScript function.
It's so easy, a caveman could do it.
The return value from this function is your HTML or UI, which is written in a special syntax called JSX, allowing you to easily combine JavaScript with HTML markup. If you want to pass data into a component, you simply pass it a props argument, which you can then reference inside the function body or in the UI using braces. If the value changes, React will react to update the UI. If we want to give our component its own internal state, we can use the state hook. The hook is just a function that returns a value as well as a function to change the value. In this case, count is our reactive state, and setCount will change the state. When used in the template, the count will always show the most recent value. Then we can bind setCount to a button click event so the user can change the state. React provides a variety of other built-in hooks to handle common use cases. But the main reason you might want to use React is not the library itself, but the massive ecosystem that surrounds it. React itself doesn't care about routing, state management, animation, or anything like that. Instead, it lets those concerns evolve naturally within the open source community. No matter what you're trying to do, there's very likely a good supporting library to help you get it done. Need a static site? You have Gatsby. Need server-side rendering? You have Next. For animation, you have Spring. For forms, you have Formic. State management, you've got Redux, MobX, Flux, Recoil, XState, and more. You have an endless supply of choices to get things done the way you like it. As an added bonus, once you have React down, you can easily jump into React Native and start building mobile apps. And it's no surprise that knowing this little UI library is one of the most in-demand skills for front-end developers today. This has been React in 100 seconds. If you want to see more short videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe, and check out more advanced React content on Fireship.io. And if you're
All right, so that being said, I hope that made sense to everyone. Well,
it does make sense, but maybe you
Yeah.
would explain
I'll
what-
definitely go over it some more. So what is React? React, like the video said, it's a UI library, not quite a framework, but it was a UI library developed and maintained by Facebook. And it's currently how it's used to make web user interfaces, right? That's web user. So anything that's dynamic content, that's what React can be used to do. So yeah. So let me just see if we can find React examples. Let's do. So this for example is the website that was used by React. Let's see. I don't think this is a really good example, but you know what? Let's yeah, I don't think this is a good example. Let's just try and find another one. Here, let's just say this. This is a calculator application. Normally, if you just your normal HTML, right, and HTML and CSS, right, you'll be able to have this layout. But to have for it to be as interactive as this, for this you'll need JavaScript, correct? You need JavaScript, and then React comes a layer up and abstracting away some of the JavaScript, abstracting away some of the configuration. So it allows you to build entire web apps, web applications, and be able to build entire websites, if that makes sense. Because of React, we can just do like 55 times 88. it equals 4,000, for example, if that makes sense. I know it may not make a lot of sense now, but it will definitely make.
Can you repeat that, please?
Oh, what do you want me to repeat?
I mean, just repeat what you said. Once you open the calculator, I didn't understand what you said.
Gotcha. So this calculator is an example of a React application, right? So what React allows us to do is it allows this web page to be very interactive due to its JavaScript. So as we click on each item, you see how it's responding here, and 88 times 66 equals that, if that makes sense. And React allows us to make web pages, web apps. It allows us to make websites. Basically anything on the web that we want interaction, we can use React for. And then also React, in terms of front-end development, React is the #1 sought after library in terms of front-end development. So if you know React, you'll definitely be in hot demand, if that all makes sense.
Okay.
Gotcha. So just a couple of things you will need in order to develop with React. The first thing you'll need is Node.js. So you can just download Node.js. You go to nodejs.org and you download the long-term support version. If you have I'm on a Mac, so downloads as a package. If you're in the Windows, it would probably download as an exe. So you just run that, right? And so that should also download npm. Because if you go on a terminal like this one and then you type in npm, if it detects it, you're good. If it does not, then you'll need to install npm. So you just go to the npm website. It comes with Node, but if it doesn't work, you can just use this in order to download it. And so the last thing you'll need is something called npx. And so to do that, you go into your terminal in VS Code. So to do that, you open VS Code, you go to terminal, then new terminal. And so what you type in is npm I or install -g and then npx. And npx is a tool that will help you install React apps. Yeah. So once you've done all that, well, actually, yeah, once you've done all that, it's very simple. All you have to do, very simple to create a React app. All you have to do is just do npx create -react -app, and then what you want to name it. So I'll just name it test. So I'll just name it test. And see here, it's installing all the dependencies, it's downloading everything it needs in order to download the application. All right, so that's all done. So this is it. So I'll just go through everything from the top. Node modules. The node modules directory / folder, all that has is it houses all the dependencies. So everything that's needed for your application to run, you see how there's a lot of things, or everything you need for your application to run will be self-contained. So if I open it here, you see it has the actual JavaScript and everything. So all your dependencies, and a dependency is just something that's needed for your application to run properly. It's your node modules. The public is any static contents that you have. For example, if you have the logo, for example, here's the logo, or the favicon. And what's the favicon? The favicon is the little icon that will show up next to your tab. That's the favicon. Manifest.json, it just contains some more data about your application. Robots.txt, or if you don't know what that is that's information that will provide to a search engine when it gets to your page, right? And then index.html, right? This is the stack. This is the basically React. It makes single page applications, so it will render everything inside this HTML file in particular, or render everything inside of this HTML div, right? That's what the public is. Most of the time, you don't need to touch the public directory at all. The source, that's where you find most of your time. That's where you'll spend most of your time. There's the app.js. Actually, let's start with the index.js. The index.js is the first file that will be ran once you start your React application. No, and so.
Well, okay, so what you're saying is once I install the React and NPX or NMX, something, I don't need to do much. It kind of pretty much runs my what's it called? It runs the code.
In terms of setting up your project, you won't have to make all of these files manually, if that makes sense.
Oh, you don't have to make them manually. It kind of comes with it. All the dependencies are downloaded. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the dependencies, your
okay.
dependencies for React to run. So just do npx create React app, the name, and out of the box, you'll be able to run it. So if I just go to test and I do npm run start, you see how it will then run out of the box, and that's what it's running, right? It's just running out of the box. You don't need with npx, you would need to do a whole lot of configuration to just get the project running, because from here you'll be able to spend your time in actually building out the application like how you want it to, if that makes sense.
Sure, it does. Thanks.
No problem. So the first file in the source that'll get ran is the index.js. And if you noticed earlier in this, we saw the div with the ID of roots. If you noticed that, because what the index.js does is it takes your act application, it gets that div ID of root, and then it puts all this inside of it. It puts your whole application inside of it, right? And yeah, and so index.css is a CSS for the index.js, of course. And then the app.js, that's where you begin actually writing your React code, right? You see all of this is not in the index.js, but index.js calls the app, and the app is basically the page you're seeing. And then that comes with the app.css, and then it has, if you run test, it has that logo.svg. It's an image. The reason that it's not in public is because this image will be used inside of the application. That's why it's here. And then for now, you don't have to worry about these two. And so two things that are very important is package.json. What package.json is if you want to install a dependency, what you do is, let's just say node modules here, I just trash it, right? You see, we have errors immediately because the node.json, the node modules, it contains all the information and all the dependencies that React needs to run. Right. So everything crashed. Why? Because these right here are the dependencies, right? And so it also has scripts that you can run. So when I did npm run start, when I did that, it won't work now, but it won't work now because node modules is gone. But these are the scripts that you will run it. And for now, you just need to worry about the scripts and the dependencies. So now if I do npm install, what npm install will do is it will now re-download all the dependencies. So if I put that, if I run that, you see now the node modules is back. And so if I do npm run start, you see now it starts again. Does that make sense, everybody? That makes sense?
Yeah, it will. No, maybe when I watch the video, it will.
For me, I think we are just starting and it will take time for us to like really understand everything in details.
Sure. All right. So there's two to explain more React to you. We're going to create two applications. One will be a counter like this, where it can have, you just click increment and decrement. The other will be a to-do list. So if you want, a to-do list, let's say if I want to say buy
Can you please also increase the font for this one? For
this
this?
one. Sure.
Yeah, it's kind of small. Thanks.
That's better. So then if I say as a to-do, I want to buy groceries, I then add the task, and then it's here. And so we can cross it out if we want to. Then we can also hit delete, right? So that's what this will be the main one we'll be creating. I'll be creating this one live, but this one is already created. I'll just show you how it is to explain some more React. So if we go to the app,
Sorry, Mr. David.
sure.
I'm so sorry. Maybe I don't know how much I'm following, but I don't know how you created the second, apart from the terminal that you opened. I don't know how you got to this other page, this one you're using right now.
This one, sure. So right now we're at the counter. So this one's already made. It's a page that's already made. So I just did. Remember, if we went to the package.json, see the start script. I'll start
Okay,
the application. So then you just do npm run start, and so that's how it starts this. So
Okay,
that makes
sounds good.
All right.
Righty.
All right. So if I go to the app.js, you notice that it runs the counter. So let me go to that. So in that video we watched earlier, what did it say? It said React the library that uses components, and a component in the bare fashion is a function. So that's what we did here. You just had function, and then you have the name of the component. So in this case, it's counter, because that's the name of the component I want. If you see in this app.js how it said counter right here, this name will be the same as this name right here, right? And so the anatomy of a component is, I'm just going to pretend this part doesn't exist, is just the function name, and then return. And so this thing right here inside of the two parentheses is something called JSX, right? It's like HTML. It gets rendered into HTML. It looks just like HTML, but the terminology of it is JSX, right? And so you do and then afterwards you do an export default and then the name of the component. You have to do the export default because if you don't do the export default, you won't be able to import the component, if that makes sense. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so going back, if you see, it's just the div, right? With the class name. Everything's in the div. You see you have this H2, which is just this H2 right here. And then we have 2 buttons for increment and decrement, right? And so I'm going to introduce you to your very first hook in React. And what is a hook? A hook is basically, excuse the pun, but a hook allows you to hook into your application to perform an action, right? See, in this case, I know when I increment and decrement, I want to be able to increase and decrease this counter, right? So in this case, I'll need something called state. And what is state? In React, a state is a piece of data that's part of the component, right? That changes, right? It's not passed in from another component. It originates within your component and it changes. So in this case, this counter, it's a piece of state, right? Because it will originate here inside of this component, and I want it to increase and decrease as I use the counter. Does that make sense?
It will come together. But can you repeat that? I didn't quite get that. I wasn't sure I was understanding.
Yeah, sure. In this case, I use this use state. It's a hook. It's a React hook that allows us to use the pun again to hook into the application. So in this case, we want to hook into the application in order to use something called state, right? And so a state is, I'll just say this, is the state of the application. For example, if you're, easy example, when you can say when somebody's standing, they're in the standing state, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's sitting, they're in the seated state, if that makes sense. If somebody is walking, they're in the walking state. It's a similar way, right? And when we use this use state hook, it adds, in this case, counts over the name of the state variable, right? So if I increment this, right, we could say now this count has a state of 1, if that makes sense. If you decrement it, it has a state of 0. Decrement it again, this count has a state of -1, if that makes sense. Right? And so when we are creating a state variable, we use the use state hook, and we import it like this with the use state hook, right? And how the syntax is it will be const, right? And then it will be an array of 2 things. That's what use state returns. The first will be the actual variable, in this case will be the count, the state variable, and then this set count is a function. Remember, we just went over functions. This set count is a function that will be used to change this count variable, if that makes sense. So if we see increment and decrement, if we see it uses this set count, for increment, it increases the count by 1, and for decrement, it decreases the count by 1, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So now going back to JSX, if you notice here, we have the counts inside of the curly brackets, right? Curly braces. In JSX, it's very important because the curly braces allow us to write JavaScript, right? Or else write JavaScript. For example, without it, if you just had it as count like this, and we save it, you see it will just literally say count, right? But because we have the
curly braces,
Yeah,
and every code would run within the curly braces. That means that's like the hook, what you want to be, what kind of thing you want the code to execute. Is that?
it's close. It's close. In this curly braces, you put JavaScript inside of the curly braces, and whatever JavaScript you put inside of the curly braces will execute, right? If that makes sense. For example,
Okay.
this count, call the curly braces here, it's calling this count variable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's what it's actually displaying, the name of the variable, right? And so then we go to the buttons. Here we have on click. Every button it's called an event. And what is an event in HTML or JavaScript? When you click on it's an event is an action that's fired when the operation is performed on an HTML element, right? So in this case, in case of on click, the operation we are performing is clicking, right? And the event that's fired is the on click, right? If that makes sense. So we're just saying when you click, call increment, when you click on increment, right? And then when you click on decrement, the on click, call decrement. If that makes sense. Does that make sense, everyone?
Mm-hmm.
All right, yeah. And so that's the gist of this particular, it's a small example, it's just of this example, right? So quiz time. What is React?
Can I have a question, sir?
Oh, you have a question? Sure, you can answer. You can ask.
Yes, my question goes to the function, right? And yeah, I want to understand some key things from the function, that is line 2, line 3, and line 4. Yes, we have count here. I think count should be here of variable name. And then I'm seeing set count. Is this set count, is it a keyword or just a variable you created yourself? And also, we have constant increment is equal to, I've seen something like a function called here, this bracket and then this sign. Can you please explain this section for me, please?
So you wanted me to explain this line and these two lines, if that's correct?
No, the function, like
Which one?
line 2, line 3, and line 4.
So these ones.
No, done. Constant count, set count, constant increment, and constant decrement.
These ones.
Yes.
I gotcha. So with these ones is I'm using this is a type of hook called useState hook, and it allows us to have state within the component. So the state is just something that can change as it's just a variable. It can be whatever you want. It's a variable that will change as with the application, right? And the reason that I have it as this, it can be this. Don't worry. As this is because use state by default is it returns use state returns an array, right? And yeah, and this is an array. Use state returns an array of 2. The first item in the array will be the actual variable, the state variable, right?
Okay.
So the second item is we need a way to change the variable, right? To set it something else. So the second is a function that allows us to change the variable, if that makes sense.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. And then inside this parentheses here, it's the default value.
Yeah, initial value.
Yeah, initial value. See how it's 0 and that's 0. That's initial value, if that makes sense. Right. And so now when we do this increment, right? We're doing the set count because we already have what the count is, but we want to increase the count to 1, right? So that's why we have the set count. The set count is provided to us by the use state. We're just calling it to saying this variable that is 0, we want to set it to 1. So that's how we do it, if that makes sense. And then the decrement the same way. We already have this count as a state variable, and React has provided us a way to change it. So when we decrement it, it's 0 right now. We want to decrease it by 1. So that's how we do it. We just do the set count minus 1. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
No problem. So now quiz time. First question. What is React?
So I'll just give it a try.
Sure.
It's a framework.
Yeah, so from what we watched, it's just a JavaScript library that helps you with building a user interface.
That is correct. Remember, it's a JavaScript library. It's not quite a framework because at its function, React only cares about one thing, allowing you to build a user interface. Everything else, it relies on the community to develop it for it. So React, it allows you, it's a library that lets you build user interfaces. That's good. Second question, I'll ask 3 questions. Second question, what is JSX?
JSX. Is it like a hook? No, is it? It's a complement. Oh, okay.
Close. But what JSX is anything that's inside of this return is JSX. At its surface, JSX looks like HTML, like this. But the key thing about what JSX allows that HTML doesn't is it allows us to put JavaScript inside of our HTML, right? With curly brackets, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yes. And now, third question, what does this use state hook do?
What does the what use state hook do?
Yeah, what does the use state hook do?
You said it's a default. So it helps you know the number of counts in terms of increment or decrement.
That's good. But you're asking in this, I'm just talking about regularly, like what does use state, what does it do? Because in the future, we may not want a count variable, we may want something else, right?
Okay.
Asking, what is use state? What does it do?
Okay.
Hello?
Yes.
I think from my own understanding, it is going to set initial value.
Okay. That's part of it. That's part of it. I think I'll just say the answer. What the use state does is it allows us to basically declare a variable that we will use with the application, right? And yeah, it changes with the application, right? And so with use state, the hook will return 2 things. The first will be the variable you want to use. The second thing will be a way for you to change the variable. And then you can set the initial value of the variable using the parenthesis as a parameter instead of the parentheses, if that makes sense.
No, can you say it again?
Gotcha. So the use state hook allows us to use a variable that we know will change. So it's not something that'll be static. It's something that will change with the application or with the component, right? And then with the use state, we can put the initial value as a parameter. And then what this returns is it returns an array. The first item will be the actual variable itself. The second item will be a function that we can use to change it, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. So now we've gone through that. We'll be spending the rest of the time. I'll be making an application live. It'll be a to-do application.
Sounds good.
I can just close all of this. So I'll just do npm on start again. And this is the application we'll be creating. It's just a to-do application. So enter new task.
Please don't be too fast, because I mean it's so new to me.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it'll make more sense as in this. I'll be making and I'll be making it live. It'll
Take
make
this
more
class
sense.
offline.
What do you
Okay.
say?
Yeah, so good. I mean, I just wanted to say, like, don't be too fast.
Oh, sure. I sure. I got you.
Okay.
All right, so and this guy's just a to-do list.
Sorry?
I'll just explain this to-do list. So, and this will be the to-do list. And so the first task, let's just say, go to the store. We'll be able to add task here. We'll be able to cross it out, and then we'll be able to delete. And that will be the main part. And so we can begin making it live. So we can just do npx create React app, and then I'll just call it to do hyphen list. And it will generate the information that we need and the project structure in order for us to get started and begin.
So while this is installing, I just want to ask a quick question regarding like the type of laptops to buy. What do you advise would be the best laptop to use if you want to go into UI UX? Is it usually Apple, or do you have
I'll
any
It depends on I'll say it depends on your budget. You can't go wrong with an Apple laptop, but they are pretty pricey. So
Yeah.
if they're not in your budget, you can definitely get by with a Windows.
With what?
With a Windows.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations? Like,
Uh, I mean, we can definitely talk offline or after
okay,
class.
so
Yeah. So what you can do is you can send it. It depends on the budget. So what you can do is you can send me in a private message what your budget is. Then I
okay,
can look and get back to you.
cool. Thanks.
No problem. All right. So now we have this to-do list. I'll just go to it. And then I will do npm on start to start it. Right. And so to begin with, we're going to start with just the app.js, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get everything so I can just show you again the anatomy of a React component. So a React component will always be, every time, it will be function. And then the name you want to name the component. In this case, I want to name the component app. And it's a very good idea to keep one component per file and to have the file name the same as the component name. Right? Just name app. And so from here, we have to return the JSX. So we'll do return. And we have to return something, right? You can't just have return empty like this. There always has to be something inside of it. So in this case, I will do something called this. This right here is called a partial. It's called a React partial. So it's because if you don't want to put like a div or span or something like that, you can put a partial, right? Because there has to be a root element, something that encompasses all the other elements in a React project, if that makes sense. So in this case, I'm just going to do an H1 and then to do list. Oh yes. And here I forgot to actually import React and to export the app. So here we'll do export defaults app, right? This right here is mandatory for actually being able to use and call the React application or the React component in another file. And so we also need to do imports React from React. And that lets us use React library. And then we have this app.css, CSS file we can use. So I'm just going to import that as well. So I'm going to import app.css. And so we see now it rendered to-do list. Does this make sense, what I just did?
Yes.
So this right here is just as simple as a React application can get. It's this. This is what it is. It's just this, right? And so in this case, I don't want to use a React partial in this case because I actually just want to use a div. So in this case, I want to give it a class name of app because later down, I want to do some nice styling with it, right? And that's how it will look like. And so if you look at a to-do list, right? A to-do list needs to have 2 items, right? It needs to have actually, so I can better show you what we're doing. The to-do list, right? It needs to have the actual place, 2 parts. You need to be able to add the to-do list, right? And you need to be able to view the to-do list. So those are 2 different things, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create more components, right? So in this source, I'll create a folder, and this is a good practice to have a folder called components that houses your components. The first component is I'll also add another folder. It's also good practice. So it can house your JavaScript and your CSS in a folder. It will be the to-do form, right? And then you also need the to-do list. This, where you add the task, this should be your to-do form. And then this, we're actually viewing can delete, that will be your to-do list, right? And so inside the to-do form, I'll just create the files. So to-do form.js, right? And so I will then have a to-do form.css. And then in the to-do list, the same thing. I'll have a to-do list.js. And then I'll have a to-do list .css. Right? Does this all make sense so far? Does this all make sense so far, what I've done?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, wonderful. So for starting, we can just start with the to-do form. So to the to-do form, the same thing. I'll just do imports, React, form, React, right? And so from there, I can start to actually, not quite, then imports to do form.css. Right? Right now, there's nothing in the CSS, but that will change with time. Right? And so now I can create the, so we'll do function to do form, right? Then I'll just export defaults to do form. And so this right here is a perfectly good way of creating a, but however, what I like to do is I like to use arrow functions. So how I would, if it were up to me, how I would personally make it is like this: const to do form. This is 100% equivalent to these two right here. They're identical. As far as concerns, you can use either one, but personally, this is just the one I like to use. It's the more modern way of doing things. So if you want to do things the more modern way, always try to use arrow functions or anonymous functions when you can. So I'll just return. And so, yeah, I'll just
So
return.
you said we should always try to use what?
What I said is, when I'm creating a, when I create a component, you can do either of these two ways. As far as I'm concerned, they are identical. They will do the same thing.
Okay.
But the more modern way is to do it this first way, an arrow function. It's the more modern way. So if you want to do things the more modern way, you should definitely try and strive to use arrow functions. If that makes sense.
Okay.
And so again, stop me if you have any questions. And so I'm going to return yes. Right. Here, I'm just going to do, in this case, I'll just do a paragraph, just name it form, right? And so in this app.js, right, what we can do now is we can do we can import it. So here we can do to do form, right? Like that. And you see here, you just put this little form. If that makes, does what I did make sense to everybody?
Yeah, it's coming together.
Come together. Wonderful. And so now we've done this, just the bare bones for the form. At the end of the day, the form
For
will look
me,
like
I don't understand why you need that.
when we did. What don't you understand? Could you explain what you don't
Like
understand?
this element you use before the form appear on the display. I don't know the function of that element. After each one to-do list,
You said
this
you
element
you don't understand this line.
in the div class, that is app, and then the element you use to display the form to the screen
Oh, this one right
Can you
here?
just explain about it?
Gotcha.
Yeah, like
So gotcha.
that,
So
that
right here,
element. What's the name of that element?
gotcha. Do you understand this? What I did in this file? Do you understand?
Understand.
Okay, you understand? Wonderful. So this is something called importing and exporting, right? So with JavaScript/React, we want to call, because this is the main page of our application, right? So what we want to do is you want to display this component, right? In order to get this component in here, we first have to export this component. That's why I said we always use export default, then the component name, right? And so when we get to where here, which is our main or the entry point, we have to import, which is here we do import to do form from components, see this components folder, to do form, you use this to do form folder, to do form. This is the same thing as to do form.js. But when you're importing, you don't have to, you can omit the .js part. And so this is a component. So now we want to call it. We call it in JSX, we call it just like regular HTML. So that's how we do it like this. Does that make sense? So this to do form right here, it's really, when we call it like this, it's rendering this component. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Okay.
All right, wonderful. All right, so next component is the to-do list. So it'll be pretty much similar. So just do imports React from React, and then you can import the CSS file, right? To-do list .css. And so remember, I like to do arrow functions. So I'm going to do const to-do list is equal to, and then here we're going to simply return another paragraph, or this time I will say list. Remember, we always say export defaults to-do list. Without it, we won't be able to import it into anywhere. So now here, I'll just import it. So import to-do list from, this case it will be components, to-do list, and to-do list, right? And so to-do list. And then the list popped up. Does what I just did make sense? Does it make sense what I just did?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
yeah.
All right, wonderful. So now we can just start off with the, I'll just writing the code for to do form. So in this case, we're going to want a form, right? Because in this case, we want to have this task. When we do the add task, we want it to do something, right? So in this case, I will say, I'll do it as a form, right? And so what forms has is forms, they have inputs, right? So I'll add the input, right? And I'll have it will be input, the type will be text, because that's what we want to display, will be text. For now, we're just going to have it as a value of form. That will change. Yeah, a value of, actually, a value of form. Actually, no, I'll just do a value of empty for now. I will do a placeholder of enter new task, ... right? And then on Underneath it, we're going to have a button. And the button will be of type submit, because we want it to be a submit button. And so add task, the name of it. And you see how this changed, right? So the placeholders enter new task. We do add task, right? If you notice, every time we do add task, if you notice, the page refreshes, right? Take note of that one. Take note of that, right? And so what we want, right, is we want when we type in a new task, right, we want to be able to type, correct? Because right now we're not able to type, right? Because what we need is something that we did before called state. We need state, because right now we're not able to type anything. So in order to fix that, you can just use the use state hook that we used before on the previous example. So it'll be const. In this case, it will be called text. Will be the name of the variable. Set text will be the function we use to change it. Is equal to use states, and then the default will be an empty string, right? And so now we can say value is equal to this text, right? And so now, before we talked about on-change handlers, right? Because right now, if I refresh it, we still won't be able to change it, right? That's because this input, we need a special handler called on-change. Like this, on-change. And so what is on-change? It's an event. But what I will do is, you may not understand this right now, but I will just log the event so y'all can see it. I'll go to my console. All right. Do you see this event right here? On the console, do you see this? Do you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you do on-change, right? This E is the actual event, right? That will get passed in. It's the event that's emitted that'll get passed into the event handler. So on-change is a handler. This E, right, it's a handler. And the value of it is, it's a function that takes in the events, right? So we see this is the event. And if you see, the event has something called target, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, and target has if I scroll down to it, target has a lot of things in it, but target has a value, right?
Hmm.
You see, so if I type something in, let's try to type something in. If I go to target again and value, actually, let me do, let me log this one so it's easier to see. You see how now, as I'm typing, e.target.value is actually what I'm typing in, right? Because how it works is E is the events, the target is this input, and the value is the value that I'm typing in. So you see, that's what I'm typing. Does that make sense? Does that make sense what I just said?
Not exactly. I don't know how
So,
those values.
so E right here, E is the event that gets emitted, right? E.target is the target of the event. So the target of the event is basically what I'm doing the operation on. is this input, right? I'm doing the operator of this input, right? And so what is the value of the operation I'm doing? Since I'm typing, the value of the operation will be the actual character that I'm typing on.
Okay.
Will be what I'm typing, right? Does that make
Because
sense?
at this point, you're just clicking on enter a new task, I guess. And
Yeah, right now I'm clicking on enter new task and I'm tapping on my keyboard.
okay, and
And-
those
and
values are appearing.
Yes, because remember I'm calling the login E, the target is this, and then value. It's the value of basically what I'm typing. It's just
Okay.
this, if that makes sense, right?
Okay. Okay.
All right. So now, since you know what E, the target or value is, you can just do that text, right? Remember, we can call this to change, actually change it. And so we can change it to E dot targets dot value. And so now what we see is now I'm able to type. Right. I'm able to type on it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And you see now, but remember when we do the add task, if you notice, nothing happens yet.
Yeah.
That's because we need a way to submit the form, right? So forms have a, what do they have? They have a event of their own called on submit. It's what happens when you submit a form. So, and so we're just gonna add the event handler here to be const handle submit is equal to this E. This E will be the actual event. And then also one thing I forgot to add, if you only have one parameter instead of an arrow function, you don't have to put the parentheses. You can, it's still valid, but if there's only one parameter, you don't have to. Right? The first thing I'm going to do is E dot prevent default. I know you don't know what that is yet. So I'm going to explain it right now. The default behavior of when you do on the form, when you click on the button that has a type of submit, the default behavior is it refreshes the page, tries to perform a request, and then it clears and then it clears everything, right? In this case, I don't want it to clear, right? So now you see now it doesn't clear, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 Because it prevents the default behavior. Default behavior is to clear. I want to clear it by myself, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So in this case, I'll do something if text dot trim, right? If that's true, what I want to do is I want to add the to do. Let's just say you have a list, right? I'll just say let's just say const to do set to do, right, is equal to use state of a list, right? Let's say you want that, right? And so if that's the case, you want to set to do, and in this case, you want to say dot to do, and then text, right? I'll explain all of this, and then set text with an empty string. So what I will do in addition is I will go ahead and put links. Okay. So you see now if I add the to do and to add task, you see it gets added inside of, let me make it bigger. See how it gets added inside of this list? Do you see that? And if I tried add another to do, it gets added again, right? Because this set to do is another state variable. So now we have two state variables. We have this set text variable, and we have this to do. We have the text and to do. Those are two state variables. So now to explain this, if text.trim, what trim does is it takes the white leading and trailing white space. So if you have something like a string like high, right? After trim, we'll just convert it to high. Does that make sense? Does that make sense so far?
Not really.
Gotcha. So text.trim, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your text is, you see how there's white space in the beginning, there's white space in the end, right, of the string, right?
Mhm.
Text.trim, what that will do is it will take the white space in the beginning and the end and it'll remove them. So you see in this one, there's no white space,
Okay.
right, in the beginning and end. Makes sense, right? If there's
Okay.
white space in the middle though, it doesn't affect it. Or remain like that, right? Yeah. And so the reason I'm able to put text.trim like this is equal to say, if text.trim basically is not equal to an empty string, they're equal. Because in JavaScript, there's something called truthies and falsies, right? So their values that will always equate to false. The values that always equate to false, they are 0, they are an empty list. I put in print 0, an empty list, and an empty string. They always equate to false, right? Everything else equates to true. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so yeah. So text.trim, so that just means, oh sorry, there's also more. There's also null, undefined, and something called not a number in the end. Those are the things that are always false, right? So in this case, when we say if text.trim, well, what we're saying is if additive trimming, if it's not empty, right, then we continue. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yes, gotcha. All right, so here we've I don't know if you noticed, but there's already an issue here, right? We have the to-dos in this component, right, of the form, but we need the to-dos. We need somehow to get the to-dos inside of this, inside of this component, because this is the list, right? Right now, we don't have a way of doing it, right? Because the to-dos, the to-do list lives here, but we need it to be here. In addition, and we can't just say put this text here because it doesn't belong here in the list. The text belongs in the form because it's used for this, right? But when the form is actually made, oh, not the form, when the to-do is, when the task is made, right? We need it to show up here. So we're stuck. We don't have a way of doing it currently. That's where something called props come in handy. So what we're actually going to do is instead of making this instead of putting this to do here, we're going to put the to do here in the app.js, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to pass a function to add the to do inside of this to do form. It may not make sense now, but as I write it up, it will make sense. So I'll just do it here for the const. I'll just name it to dos. That to dos is equal to use date. Yeah. And so I'm going to do const add to do is equal to, it'll take a text, right? And so I will say const new to do is equal to, what I'm going to do is, before I made it as just a regular string, right? But remember, a to-do list, we need to know if a to-do list is complete or not, right? And it needs to know the text. And ideally, we should have an ID so we're able to differentiate them. So in order to do that, we're going to use something called JSON. Or not JSON, we're going to use it as a JavaScript object. So a JavaScript object starts with curly braces, right? And it has a key and a value. So the first key we'll have is ID. And for the ID, I'll just say date.now. What date.now does is it just gives a string of the current time it is now, right? Down to the millisecond, I believe. Right? And so we will have the text, which would just be the text. And then whether it's complete or not. Completed false. Right? And so we're going to do is set to dos. Will be all the to dos and then the to do. Does this make sense? Or do you need me to explain it further?
No, it does make sense a bit, but I'm just waiting for you to run for it to, effect the change.
Gotcha. No problem. So what we're going to do here then is in this to do form, I'll just say add to do is equal to add to do, right? So what this does is add to do is now the name of a prop, right? Right. It's just it won't run because we're not quite done with it yet. But this add to do now is now the name of a prop, and you also need to add usually, yeah. Add to do is not the name of the prop. So now if we go to this to do form, we can now remove this, right? Now we can remove this too. And so what we can now do is here, instead of this prop, you have two options. You can just say something like, you can add the props here, and then in here, you would have to destructure it in terms of const add to do equal to props, right? This is one option of getting the props. What is called is destructuring, right? You destructure, so props, it will be a JavaScript object, right? Just like this is JavaScript object, right? For example, this is JavaScript object. If you want to get the ID, you could say, you could have said const, like for example, ID is equal to new to do, right? And then this would get you the ID, if that makes sense. It's the same thing we're doing here. But props, it will be an object of everything you pass into here like this. However, how else you can do it is you can destructure it directly inside of here. So you can just do add to do just like that, and then it saves, and then it'll save you a line. So this will be valid. Does this make sense? Does this make sense? Oh, wonderful. And so now what we can now do is we can just say add to do with the text, just like that, right? So now when we refresh the page, so now it will now, the state will now be a part of the app. If you just type something and you add task, you see now we have an ID, we have the task, and now we have completed equals false, right? So now, since it now belongs a state on the very top component, we can now pass it, into this to-do list, right? So then the to-do list will be able to see the component, right? And it will all make sense when we now write the to-do list, right? So we have the to-do list now. And so what we're going to do is we're going to return an unordered list. But before we do that, we should go back to the app.js file. And so we want to pass in to-dos. So to-dos is equal to to-dos. Just like that, right? So now we have we can just add to-dos like that. And so if we then go back to the to-do list or to-do list, we have an unordered list. I remember we need to, unordered list requires list items, right? But we need them to be part, you need the list items to be the actual to-dos, right? So that means we need JavaScript. So how do we include JavaScript inside of our GSX? What do we do? Do you remember? Do you guys remember? How do we include JavaScript inside of GSX?
I think we will. Is
It's okay.
import?
Or what do you say?
Is it import and choose the
Not quite. But what we do is we use these curly braces.
curly braces? Okay.
Does that ring a bell?
Yes. And then is it the hook at the hook
Yes.
JavaScript?
So now we have the curly braces. We can write JavaScript, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So to-dos right here, to-dos is a list, right? Let me add another to-do. All right. So now we have two to-dos, right? To-dos is a list.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So, but we want to transform it into something. So one thing we can do is we can use the map. what map does is it's a function, right? Not the to-do. The function that you do it, it'll operate on the list, right? And what it will do is it will take, basically, it takes the element of a list, right? And then it transforms them into something else, right? I don't know if that makes sense. So if we do to-dos dot map, because if you see, so map, it calls the function one at a time on each element, right? So there are 2 elements, so it'll call it one at a time. So yeah, it will make sense as we go on, I promise. We have the element actually iterating over will be each of these individual to-dos. So that's what I have to do here. And so what we want to return is a list item. It's a list item, right? And then if you noticed in here, I made sure to put a DID, right? That's because when you do map, it requires you to have the key, and the keys must be unique. So that's why I'm able to do the ID, right? And so from there, I'll just have a span, right? And then the span will just be to-do text, right? And then a button, and then the button will just say delete. And you see now, pops up. Let me,
What's the span, please?
what do you say?
What's span? You just added the
Yes. So what is, sure, good question. What a span is you know what a div is, right?
yeah.
You've seen div, yeah. What div, for example, if these were divs, what we see is divs, it takes the entire row, right? It takes the entire row. But since I want them right next to each other, that's why I use the span. Span,
Okay.
it only takes up as much space as the contents. If that makes sense.
Okay.
Mhm. All right. So now, but there's more. When we click, so now we can create new tasks and they pop up, right? Because we use the to-do, the to-dos are here, belong to the app, right? And when we delete them, and when we add them, it populates them, the actual to-dos here, and the function to add them, we populate here. However, the delete doesn't work. We need to be able to delete the to-dos, right? So again, you might think, okay, the to-do list shows up here. This is where the list is. Can we delete the to-dos here? The question will be no, because remember, we made a decision to move it to the top. So this is where the to-dos are. So the same way we passed in the add to-do to this, to-do form, we need to pass in a delete to-do to the to-do list. Does that make sense so far?
Yes.
Wonderful. So what we can simply do is do const delete to-do, and then it'll take in an ID as a parameter. And so from there, you can say const updated to-dos is equal to to-dos dot filter, I'll explain what filter does in a moment. It'll be to do the ID equal ID. And then from there, we do set to do's updated to do's. So filter, what filter does is it takes a function, right? In this case, this is the function. And it'll only keep the elements inside of the original array or original list that fulfill this function. So in other words, it'll call this function on every element inside the array. And for the elements that return true, it'll keep them. So in plain words, it'll only keep the elements that don't have the ID. Basically, this element has an ID, this element has an ID, this element has an ID. If I call delete to do with the ID of this element, of course, this condition will fail. So it'll only return these two elements, effectively deleting this one. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I'll assume it does. And so next, in the to-do list, we'll just need to add the delete to do, right? And so delete to do will equal to delete to do. And so if we go back to the to-do list, we have the span, right? I remember all elements, you can click on them, right? I have the button so you can click on them. So this button, remember we had the on click before. I'll just add it here again. And you notice I didn't pass in the E, because in this case we don't need the actual exception, or not exception, the events. Because remember, parameters are optional in JavaScript. So do delete. I'll remember here, we'll also need to pass in delete to do. So delete to do, and then it'll be to do dot ID. Right. Then if you click on it, you see now, and now gets deleted. Now we're able to delete. Any questions so far? Any
No.
questions?
Not at the moment for me, because I can rewatch the video. Just a little. I just have some gaps while learning now, but I think maybe when I watch the video, I'm gonna probably connect the dots.
Okay, sure. It's almost, sure, no problem. It's almost done. And so next thing we need to do is we need to toggle whether a to-do has been completed or not. And so that'll be simple to do. You can just have another function called toggle to do. It will take an ID. And so just like we did a map in this one, we will also do a map. So we'll do const updated to-dos is equal to to-do. And remember, to-do will be this to-dos dot map. And so it would then take this single to-do. And so in it, remember, we want to set it to completed, right?
Mm.
So how we know that? We know if basically to do.id, if that's equal to ID, right? We need to basically return the to do. What that will do is, since to do is an object like this, it will fill in all the elements inside of here. And then after that, we can change what we want to change. The completed will be equal to not to do dot completed. And not to do that completed, what it'll do is it just toggles not false is true, not true is false. It just toggles it. The reason we do it like this is because in the front end word, we try to make things immutable. What immutable means is things do not change. If you want something to change, we create a new one. So in this case, we're creating a new object from scratch, and we're filling it in with the information we need. Of course, if the ID isn't what we want, we just don't want to do anything. So let's return to do. And then at the end of it all, you set to do's, updated to do's. Does this make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right, wonderful. And so now we just add the toggle to do equal to toggle to do. Right. Just like that. And now in the to-do list, I have the span, right? Now with the span, spans to every element is clickable. So every element can have a click on click handler too. So just have this on click is equal to the same way. But remember, we have DT, we should also add the toggle to do. That's all. Is equal to then gonna toggle the to do. Right? And so it will be the to do ID. So when you click on it now, when you click on the span right here, what it'll do is it'll toggle the set up this to do the completed. If it's false, we'll set it to true. If it's true, it'll set it to false. But however, we need a way, for example, we may want to cross it off, right? If it is completed. How do you do that? Well, what we can do is in this list item li, what we can do is we can add a class. So we add a class name, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the class name, we want it to be dynamic through JavaScript.
Delete. Sorry.
With the class name, we want it to be dynamic through JavaScript, right? So we will use the curly braces again.
Okay.
What we're gonna say is if the to do, if it's completed, I'm gonna introduce something called a ternary operator. I'll explain what it does soon. How about if I write it? This right here is a ternary operator. What a ternary operator does is it takes a condition to do that completed, right? Then a question mark, the value to return if it's true, the value, and then colon, the value to return if it's false. So we're saying the class name should be, if to do the completed is true, the class name should be completed. If it's false, the class name should be blank. If that makes, does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. So now I'm just going to, the only way it will show up is through you see right now the LI has no class. When you click on it, you see the class comes up as completed. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And then goes away, completed, goes away, right? So as of right now, we have all the JavaScript functionality, right?
Mm.
However, this does not look like this. They look very, very different. So in order to reconcile the two, that's where we'll now use our CSS. All right. So I'm just going to start off. Remember the app.js, the first thing is at least center everything and give it this nice big text, right?
Okay.
So if I go to just our app.css, I'm going to take all of this. I'm going to remove it. And remember, we added this class of an app. So I'll just fix this. I'll just do text align center, just to center everything. And then a margin top of 50 pixels. Just so you know, there's some space at the top, right?
Sorry, sir, Mr. David.
Yes.
So if I understand correctly, we just finished our code build. Is that correct? Like
Yes.
the code and everything. So what you're doing now with the app.css is you're trying to transfer this to a production or live environment. Is that?
Yeah, to because right now this looks quite ugly, right? I'm sure you can appreciate this looks quite ugly. This, on the other hand, does not, right? So we are going to use CSS to transform this into this, right? Because right now, the core JavaScript functionality, that's all done. But personally, if I created an application that looks like this, I would keep it to myself. I wouldn't show anybody. Versus this, I might show it to everybody, if that makes sense. Because this looks good. Does that make sense?
Okay.
All right. So
Sorry, but my question was, after the code build on your private environment, then you transfer it to the CSS environment. Is it still a DevOps environment, or are you taking it to production?
I won't say I wouldn't say CSS environment. We're still in the development environment.
Okay.
Yeah, everything is still in development
It's still on dev. Okay.
Still on
Thanks.
dev, yes. So the next thing is this H1. So just simply going to take this H1 and then I'll add the color, and then the color I'm going to do is 4CAF50. And now the color changed, right? The next thing we want to style is we want to style this form itself. We want to style this form. That won't be a problem at all. So just go to the to-do form.css. And so the first thing is we're going to style the form directly. So I'll just say form. Again, I'll just add a bottom. So margin, bottom, 20 pixels. Just so it just down a little bit. The next thing I'm going to do is this input right here. I'm just going to style that one. So with the input, I'm going to add a padding just of 10 pixels, just so it buffs it out a little bit. it looks a little choked. So I'm gonna add a width of 300 pixels. Just so it's a little bit bigger. It has a border currently, I don't like that. So I'll just put the border as none, so that goes away. I wanted to have a little bit of a radius on the board, so I'll have a little bit of curved edges. So border radius, I'll have those 4 pixels. And then I'll just simply do just add a little bit of margin. So just the margin right of 10 pixels, right? Just so it adds some space between these two. And then afterwards, I'll simply do a font size of 16 pixels. Just so it's a little bit bigger, right? Does this make sense so far? Are you done?
Yes, does.
All right. And so next I'm going to style is this button. So we're just going to do the button. It's still small, so I'm going to add some padding. So add some padding. It will be 10 pixels on the top and bottom, and then 16 pixels left and right. Like that. I want to change the color. So I'll change the background color to 4CA F50. It'll be the same color as this. It should be 4CA F50. Okay. I want the color of the text. I want that to be white. I don't want a border. I think that looks a little ugly. Just say border none. I want a little bit of a radius or curved edges. I'll just say border radius of 4 pixels. When I hover over it, I want it to be a pointer, not this. So it looks clickable. So I'll just say cursor pointer. Now when I click. So now you see now when I go over it, the cursor changes. And then the font size, I want to increase it a little bit. So set it to 16 pixels. Like that. And you see now it's looking better, right? So now the final part that we'll need to style will be this actual to-do list. All right, so we have this unordered list we want to style, right? So I'll just say UL for the unordered list. You see, we have this dot. I think the dot looks ugly in our case. I don't want it. So I'm just gonna say list style type none. And I'll remove it. And I don't want any padding on it. So I'll say padding 0. There we go. Next, you can style the list item itself. So these allies itself. We're going to flex the display, or just to display flex. Now we want to center them. So align item center. So what I'll do, yeah, it'll center each item, right? And so I want them, if it makes sense, I want this and the delete on opposite sides of the page. So for that, I'll say justify contents, space between, just like that. And then, but I still want some padding. So I have some padding is 10 pixels all the way around. There needs to be some margin. So I'll add a margin bottom for 5 pixels. And then I want that border radius, so I'll just say border radius of 4 pixels. Now, background color. I want the background color to be slightly off-white, so I'll just say F5, F5, F5. That way it's slightly off-white. And then lastly, I want there to be a box shadow. So the box shadow will be 0 pixels, 2 pixels, 4 pixels. And then the color, that's what RGBA is for. The alpha is the opacity. So it will just be black. And then the opacity will be 0.1. So that tiny shadow will see underneath it. And then, yeah. And so remember, we wanted to differentiate when it's completed. So for that, I'll do li dot is the list item with the class of completed. So I'll change the background color. I'll now set it to D9, D9, D9. And then I'll set the text decoration to line through. And what that will do is, you see, when you click on it, it just puts a line right through. That's what line through does. Okay. And so now, this whole span, it's a flex item. So I'll do li, and then the span that's inside of it, I'll do flex grow. I'll do 1. Then the cursor, I'll do pointer. There you go. So the flex grow 1, it centered it just because I want the span to grow with the container. So you see now it's always being centered. Does that make sense? And so next, there's the button. This button right here. I want to modify it. So li button. I want to add some padding to it. So it will be the padding. It will be 6 pixels on the top and bottom, 12 pixels on the left and right. And that helped quite a bit. I want to change the background color to a red color. So background color, I will set the background color to be, it will be F44336. For that. The color, white. Border radius, 4 pixels. Little cursor pointer. The font size, I want that to be 14 pixels. Just a little smaller. And so, and then when we hover it, I wanted to change color. So be at the list item button, hover. And this is the pseudo selector hover. I want to set the background color to a slightly darker shade. It will be E53935. So now when I hover, it changes slightly different color. And now the to-do list is styled. Based on what it looked like before, I think it definitely looks a lot better now. Agreed? Yeah. And then you can delete it as well too. So any questions?
No, I think I so this is a lot more simple. This one is so simple. Pretty much understandable.
Well, yeah. So yeah, about the assignment is to build a to-do list app like this. Don't make it exactly the same. Just build a to-do list app. If you're able to build a to-do list app, a lot of things will make a lot more sense. So you can follow the lecture and just by next week have a to-do list app built, and you definitely understand React a lot more.
Okay,
Mhm.
I'm gonna try it.
But yeah, I'll strive to post by tonight. So yeah.
Good. Thank you so much. Are we done?
We are done.
Wow, that's so okay. Good.
We are done.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. No problem. All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. David.
No problem.
Please, we would like you to also add a code of the class.
What do you say?
To add a script.
I mean, what I will do is I'll upload the lecture. Once the lecture gets uploaded, I'll share it. Yeah, so you can take a look at it, and then you can implement a to-do list app of your own.
Okay, sir.
All right. All right, but that'll be it. I'll see everyone next week.
Thank you. Have a good one.
See you. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.